Chronic, mute yourself.
On it.
And welcome, Hoosier fans, to this week's edition of Assembly Call Radio, where each week we discuss the most urgent topics in the never-dull world of Indiana basketball. This is our 129th edition of Assembly Call Radio, and it is our 521st episode overall of the Assembly Call, recorded on the evening of Thursday, July 11th, 2019. I am your host, Jerod Morris. And let's begin this edition of the Assembly Call how we begin every edition of the Assembly Call, and that is with our Hoosier Proud banner moment.
And Indiana is the national champion.
When it comes down, Indiana will be champion.
Smart takes the shot.
The Hoosiers have won the national championship.
This week's banner moment is actually three moments combined into one. First, Thomas Bryant agreed to a 3-year, $25 million deal with the Washington Wizards. Then Yogi Ferrell had his second-year option picked up by the Sacramento Kings. Yogi will make $3.15 million next season. And finally, Noah Vonleh received a 1-year deal with Minnesota worth $2 million. Add those three contracts to the guaranteed rookie contract Romeo Langford will get, somewhere around $2.9 million per year, plus the money coming from the existing contracts of Victor Oladipo, Cody Zeller, OG Anunoby, and Eric Gordon. And former Indiana players will make roughly $67 million next season. $67 million for one season of basketball between 8 players. That's a lot of money. And something tells me that some form of the story I just told you is being weaved into every recruiting pitch that Archie Miller and his staff give to potential Hoosiers and their families, plus some of the motivational speeches they give to players on the current roster. Because while you and I can sit here with our probabilities and percentages and say that only the best of the best of the best will ever sniff the NBA and that kind of money, here's the reality. Any high school basketball player good enough to be recruited by Indiana is good enough to have reasonably plausible dreams of becoming an NBA player. As you know, OG was ranked 294th in his class. All-NBA guard Damian Lillard was 214th. TJ McConnell was 348th. Ja Morant, who went number 2 in the most recent draft, wasn't even ranked. But those guys had NBA dreams, and they worked hard to achieve them. Now they're millionaires. Just like Devontae Green, Justin Smith, Al Durham, and every other player on IU's roster has NBA dreams and is working hard to achieve them. You know who else has NBA dreams? Trey Galloway and Anthony Leal and Matt Cross and Christian Lander and Trey Kaufman and every other player Archie is recruiting. And while we can all agree that part of coming to Indiana needs to be a genuine desire to play for Indiana and to add to the rich history of Indiana basketball and to be a serious student, we're all fools and hypocrites if we expect high school prospects and their parents to not also be thinking about what's in the best interest of their basketball futures after Indiana. Well, if you're a recruit, what's the best way to paint you a picture of where being an Indiana basketball player can take you? By showing example after example of players who have come through Bloomington and are living their dreams, the same as your dreams, in the NBA and making $67 million while doing it. So congrats to all 8 of Indiana's current NBA players. It wasn't too long ago that list was painfully short. Hopefully, Juwan joins them to make it 9. I'm happy for each of those guys individually because they've earned their NBA careers and their life-changing money, and I'm happy Archie has them to use as a recruiting tool as well as a motivational carrot to the current roster because $67 million is a hell of a powerful message he can deliver. All right, now let me introduce my esteemed co-host for this week's show. To my left, he is the Megan Rapinoe of Girls Youth Sports Coaching in Cincinnati, the president emeritus of the Robert Johnson Fan Club, and one of the world's most respected bracketologists.
Bottoms looms over other bracketologists the way 7'3" Kristaps Porzingis looms over point guards.
He is Andy Bottoms. Andy, what is your Bottoms line from the last week in Indiana basketball?
Well, there's really not a lot. I think we may have reached peak offseason where we've got recruiting talk. We've got people overanalyzing social media posts to see what that means, if anything, for Jerome Hunter's outlook. We got a Bob Knight story popping up. I mean, I think we're officially at peak offseason at this stage of the game. And, for me, really a little bit surprised compared to where we were at the last show that we haven't heard anything about who is going to fill the assistant coaching vacancy. So that's a little bit odd, but otherwise we're right in the depths of the offseason trying to find some things to talk about that are different and new. And So from that perspective, I guess in some ways no news is good news. But yeah, for me, it's really the assistant coaching spot not being filled yet. Although I know with some of the live recruiting periods, it becomes a little bit difficult to actually figure out how and when to actually do that and get that started. So maybe that has something to do with it. And maybe once that winds down, we get a little bit better idea of where that's going to shake out. But otherwise, it's been a pretty quiet couple weeks.
And to my right, no Ryan, no coach this week, but we do have a special guest with us. He is a renowned and respected IU superfan, the co-host of Mind Your Banners, and the president emeritus of the T. John Job fan club. And he has given us some of my personal favorite sound drops of all time.
I'll be that guy with my ass out literally at center court at Cameron Arena. I officially dubbed this the Rick Pitino segment because it comes and goes before you know it.
And then, of course,
Can a brother get some coupons?
he is Chronic Hoosier. Connor, we have missed the tournament 3 years in a row. We don't have any commits in the class of 2020 yet, and we're missing an assistant coach. How are you enjoying the offseason so far?
I'll tell you what, I've got a little mini vacation coming up. So this is my favorite part of the off season right now. But no, seriously, I take my own personal off season every year. Just work demands, family demands, and just the emotional exhaustion from another year of not making the tournament. I kind of unplug a little bit. I've made reference, I think, with this or about this with you guys before. And there's always that point in the summer where the rhythm kind of changes and you get your fill of B-Town summer and you start to miss the students and you start to miss the energy that campus brings to our little town. And then personally with my sports affiliations and fandoms, you reach that point where you start jonesing for some Indiana athletics again. I love me some Cubs. I'd really like to see them get their stuff together and actually make a move in this miserable NL Central. But I've got the itch right now. So I've turned my notifications back on. I'm back on the blogs. I'm just kind of getting caught up with what you guys have been diligently plowing through in the summer workout season. But, you know, I'm not gonna lie, man, I got the bug. I've got an itch to find out what IU football is capable of. In the last podcast, Zach and I did, I kept hammering on the parallels right now and the state of the programs, the trajectories for IU football and IU basketball. And there are certainly some massive question marks hanging over both programs as far as where things are going to tilt. And I think it's going to be a really pivotal year for both programs. I'm ready to get started with it. I'm ready to see where this thing goes.
All right, well, here's what we're going to talk about this week. A few Hoosier headlines, as we always do. Then we are each going to basically make our case for why Indiana will or can exceed expectations this season after falling so far below them last season. And finally, we'll answer some of the questions that you sent in. All of that coming this week on Assembly Call Radio. Before we get to all that, a word from this week's sponsor, SeatGeek. Do you ever feel like ticketing websites make getting to the event difficult on purpose? It's as if they're so big, they feel like they can get away with not caring about the customer experience. But not SeatGeek. SeatGeek cares desperately about the satisfaction of their customers, which is why a quick glance at the App Store shows over 50,000 five-star reviews. Why? Because SeatGeek delivers a better process for buying tickets. SeatGeek pulls together millions of tickets from all over the web, and then they rate each deal on a scale of 1 to 10, and the user interface communicates it all clearly by displaying tickets on an interactive seat map so you can see right where they are, and by using a color-coded system for value. Green dots mean good deals, red dots are overpriced. Plus, every purchase is fully guaranteed, so you can shop for tickets with confidence. I have the SeatGeek app on my phone. It's by far the fastest and easiest way to find tickets. When my wife and I want concert tickets or sporting event tickets, it is always the first place that we look.
Can a brother get some coupons?
Of course. Best of all, SeatGeek will even give you $10 off your first SeatGeek purchase. All you need to do is use our promo code. So download the SeatGeek app today and use the promo code ASSEMBLY for $10 off your first purchase. That's promo code ASSEMBLY for $10 off your first purchase. All right, guys. Well, Andy, as you kind of alluded to in your opening statements, not a ton of Hoosier headlines. You know, this is obviously a big recruiting weekend. A lot of IU prospects playing in the Peach Jam, the Adidas Summer Championships, the Under Armour Finals. So Indiana coaches are kind of spread out looking at those guys. We're still on commitment watch. Most people who are plugged into this seem to think that either Trey Galloway or Matt Cross might be the first to commit. Neither one is a guarantee, although you continue to hear positive chatter about Galloway. We'll see, about that. If we do get a commitment here anytime soon, it certainly would be nice. The assistant coaching position obviously still remains open. And then the big news this week that Bob Knight has purchased a home in Bloomington. So, Chronic, of those, kind of pertinent stories in the world of IU basketball this week, which one kind of jumps out the most to you that you want to comment on?
I mean, I think the low-hanging fruit here is Bob Knight's return to Bloomington. It's now documented in property transfer records that he is once again a property owner in Monroe County. It's been pretty well known in local circles that Coach Knight's made many visits, like many visits back to the area over the years. It's not like this is just suddenly something that's popped up. There's certainly perhaps a deeper hole to jump in when it comes to the reasons, the motivations behind it. There's been a lot of talk about how it may relate to his personal health and what that means for his future. I guess, and we were kind of talking about this a little bit before we jumped on. I've had a lot of conversations with people around town today. I'm still trying to wrap my head around how relevant it really is, as far as how meaningful it is. And I think a lot of that's on multiple levels, not the least of which probably first and foremost on the personal level. I'm still trying to comprehend how much my feelings have shifted on this subject just in the last decade. And I do feel that the news kind of has diminished value in as much as there's been so much water under the bridge here. I've always hoped there would be reconciliation. It certainly seems like things are progressing towards that with Coach coming on campus for the baseball game. I tweeted out earlier, he's like literally four and a half blocks away from me now. It's wild to think that Bob Knight's now one of my neighbors.
You can go watch a game with him.
I would love to. I'd actually, more than anything, I'd love to go fishing with Coach. I don't know that I want to be in a field if he's got a loaded firearm, because I know he was once an avid hunter, but I'm pretty sure he still gets a line wet. That would be awesome. But I am curious to see what type of interactions he chooses to have, both with the community now as a neighbor. Like, am I going to see him at Kroguchi? That would blow my mind, and it'll absolutely be on every social media platform I have. I'm not sure how I'd caption that yet, though. But I'm curious to see, do we see him back on campus? Do we see him back in Assembly Hall specifically? Obviously, he's been at the baseball stadium. The first opportunity would be either at a football game or one of the soccer matches. It would not be an IU basketball event if he chose to engage with the campus early in the semester. But I'm anxious to see what that means, and I'm anxious to see how the dialogue kind of processes what that news matters. Now, all that said, I think the biggest news, honestly, for IU is not whether or not a coach from almost 2 decades ago is living back in Bloomington now. It's who's coaching this team right now. Like, we are in a live recruiting period. We talked about, there was years ago where I think Coach Green found himself in a similar situation. And while it was in a sense problematic for a lot of levels, it also presents this unique opportunity where you can have people who aren't officially with the team, who are kind of doing your bidding as well, at least putting feelers out with kids. You can have more boots on the ground. I don't know if that's necessarily legal, but it's hard to track when you don't have a named coach, I guess. So I do think that's certainly an issue for me at this point, especially with where they are on the recruiting trail. Having missed the tournament 3 years doesn't help them a whole lot now. So you've got to go back to selling that vision, that plan. You don't have the film, you don't have the record to necessarily brag on. And it certainly helps if you've got another body out there that can sell that message. So I'd love to know what the message is, and I'd love to know who's delivering it for IU right now.
It is worth noting, while the assistant coaching position still isn't filled, Bill Komar, whose official title is Assistant Athletic Director for Basketball Administration, is kind of out on the recruiting trail for Indiana right now. And he's been an assistant before. He's done some recruiting before. So I guess Indiana was somewhat well positioned for this, to have someone on the staff who could step in that has some experience, so they're not just losing out on this time when they could have had an assistant out there. So it's nice to have some depth on the coaching staff to be able to handle this. Andy, your thoughts on any of the Hoosier headlines?
Yeah, I mean, kind of like I said in the opening, I think the assistant coaching thing is interesting, but as you said, the rules, as I understand it, allow you to take another guy who's currently on staff to be the fourth person out on the recruiting trail during this time period. So of the guys there, Komar seemed the most likely, since he's been with Miller for a bit and has some experience, as you said. So I am curious to see when that will come to a head. I do think it's probably a question of not wanting to reach for somebody, and no different than a scholarship. You don't want to give it just because you have it and figure that out. So probably a little bit of truth to that. But I think, for me, it's a bit of the recruiting stuff. I think Chronic covered the Bob Knight news well. It certainly is a lot closer to it than either of us. From a recruiting standpoint, it feels like ideally, one domino kind of starts, knocks into a few others and things start to figure themselves out. It's just a matter of when that first one will fall. Seems to be, positive news on the Trey Galloway front and all those kinds of things. And so, you like some of the things you hear about him, but really it's just a waiting game at this point. And I think the staff has made it relatively clear who their top priorities are. And you kind of see which of those dominoes falls. And then, maybe that causes some other guys to commit. And some of the guys that they're looking at are pretty unlikely to commit this early. So, I think there's only a handful that may be in a position or of the mindset to commit in or around anytime around now. So we'll just kind of wait and see.
One last question on the night thing, Chronic. A lot of people have talked about this on social media. Did you have any problem with how it was handled by the media in terms of basically publicizing where his house is? And obviously now people know, within 4.5 blocks where you live, so some intrepid person is going to be knocking on every door trying to figure out your identity.
There's a lot of houses between the Yeagleys and the Knights, so good luck. No, seriously though, I think part of this is complicated by his current status medically or health-wise at least. Obviously he's kind of in the twilights as far as his retirement goes. At the end of the day though, too, everybody's information is public record when you buy property, when those exchanges happen. I do think the paper, I feel like they were in the right, at least as far as public. They didn't give it, at least I haven't seen it, the exact address. Now I did search. There is a website, the Monroe County GIS, that lets you search by property owner's name, and it pulls up the actual assessor's form that shows you the address and the pictures and all the tax information, all that. It's really difficult to hide from that. I mean, and if you wanted to, you certainly have the ability to create a shell corporation, an LLC, something that you can put that name in, or that property's name under, whether it be a trust or otherwise. Yeah. So the fact that it wasn't established that way perhaps tells you he's willing to be, a known resident here. End of the day though, too, it's in the public domain one way or another. And I think they do have a duty to report it. I know the neighborhood. It is recently built. It's basically a big loop with the cul-de-sac inside the loop. If somebody wants to go bother every resident there just to see where Coach Knight lives, to literally get told, get off my lawn. I mean, I don't know how else you expect that to go. I would be really hesitant myself to go door knocking and eventually find the one where Coach Knight lives, because I don't know what type of reception you'd be in for. I would hope that people would give him his privacy and at least respect that and kind of allow him to engage on his own terms. But yeah, as far as whether the propriety of that information being out there again, it's amazing what you can find out. That I do it all the time. Actually, I've got all sorts of neighbors I had no idea I lived by, because that stuff's out there if you want to go look for it.
Yeah. All righty, coming up on the Assembly Call, we are going to look ahead to next season. It's easy to paint a picture for why IU may struggle next year, but what are the most compelling reasons to believe the Hoosiers can exceed what are sure to be low expectations? Stick with us here on the Assembly Call. We're going to discuss it. All right. Sweet. Thanks everybody for being here live. Awesome to see you. Kent Davis is watching the Peach Jam and giving us scouting reports in the chat. Yeah, thanks for being here, Chronic, especially on kind of short notice.
No, I'm so sorry. I've been such an impossible. I've been working my butt off here for the last year. I'm in a new role, just going on all cylinders, and it's been insane. My hours are a little bit shifted, but as that's progressed, my kids are getting older and everything else. It's amazing how quickly things compress around you. So I apologize for all the times I haven't been able to join, but I'm thrilled to be back.
Yeah, no, it's good to have you here. Andy, thanks for holding down the fort last 2 weeks. Have you hosted the last 2 weeks?
We didn't have a show last week, so I didn't do it.
That's right.
I definitely did, though. I certainly did. I held down a fort.
No, Chad held down the fort with the AC Extra.
That's true.
Which was a great idea by him. So hat tip to Chad. We look forward to hopefully getting more of those.
Where else is is there another chat happening in another forum that I'm missing? I got the chat on the Zoom.
Yeah, so there's the chat on YouTube. Here, I'll post the YouTube link in here so you can.
Bang. I'll jump on over there too.
You can hop in there. Just make sure when you open it to pause it so you don't get the delayed feedback in your ear. Yeah.
Gotcha.
By the way, huge discovery for my family this week. We started watching Mr. Rogers. Actually, we started watching Mr. Rogers like a while ago, and my daughter was kind of into it, but not really. Now she just loves it. So like for the past 2 weeks, like all she's wanted to watch is Mr. Rogers. And I had forgotten how amazing that show is. It is unbelievable. So if you have kids and they're not watching Mr. Rogers,
especially when you contrast,
it's so much better than anything out there.
All the brain rot that's produced for children of that age right now, and just how god awful it is. And I wish I could tell you that it gets better, but honestly, I think it makes them dumber as they get older because the programming's so much worse.
Oh yeah,
the way that stands up, just from an entertainment standpoint, from a social emotional development standpoint for children, it's amazing. It's just amazing content.
And the connection kids have with it, like it's funny because her preschool teacher. It was like an older lady, and everybody. She was like the female Mr. Rogers, so I think that might be like part of why he connects with it, just because like her mannerisms and the way that she talked were so similar. But it's amazing to see her just be like transfixed when there's like no quick cuts, there's like silence, and it's like, she's like watching a 3-minute video of erasers being made and just transfixed by it. It's like, this is awesome. This is awesome. So anyway. That was a fun discovery for us this week. All right, gents. So let's so I'll kind of open this up, briefly go over the case against us being an NCAA tournament team, which is pretty obvious, but I'll just run through some of those things. You guys can jump in with any that I'm forgetting, and then we'll talk about reasons why we can be. And I'll go to you guys first, and then I've got some prepared here if we need some filler.
Okay.
Yeah. Did you hear a podcast on the brink with Dylan Burkhart this week?
Yeah, I listened to it last night.
Yeah, needless to say, he's not going to be defending Indiana and Archie Miller for a while after picking Indiana to win the Big Ten last year.
Yeah, burned a little bit.
Yeah, he did.
Just a touch.
Just a tad. Okay.
But then he's saddle enough to ride with Brett Underwood now. I mean, not to win the league, but
yeah. Illinois is getting a lot of preseason love. I kind of see it, but I don't know.
I feel like there's always a lot of that whenever teams like bring. I was liking it to. I mean, they were better last year, and it's like they have a lot of guys coming back, and they have a few particularly interesting guys. But I don't know. Sometimes bringing a lot of guys back from a team that wasn't very good isn't necessarily a good thing.
I think the coaching situation is a lot kind of like IU's roster was last year. Like there is a ton of talent spread around the Big Ten. But until you really get that tape and figure out exactly what the styles are going to be like and how it's going to transcend from, roster to roster over the years, really that identity is still forming. And I can see a lot of teams that elevate to that upper echelon of the league. But at the end of the day too, I could see a lot of them just falling short for the same reasons that have kind of kept those programs kind of static over the last 2 decades as well. I think it's going to be really interesting to see what happens with the changes at Michigan. Every year I wonder, is this going to be as those last, and exactly how does that change the landscape? It's certainly on the precipice of a huge pivot in one direction or another. It remains to be seen. I'd love to see an era where, Illinois is perennially back in the game, where Ohio State's perennially back in the game as far as competing for conference championships. I just think it elevates the entire kind of band, that southern band of the Big Ten that we're in.
Yeah, I agree. Big Ten basketball was good back in those days. Get Indiana back up there too one of these days.
Yeah, I feel like Michigan State's the obvious one, and I think Maryland and Ohio State are kind of like the next two, and then you could draw a lot of the next ones out of a hat, depending upon who you like and what you think and what happens with Bohannon and those kinds of things. But the one thing I did agree with him on is I just can't, the Penn State, like just don't, I don't want to hear anybody tell me about what they're going to do when he's proven year after year that he's not able to reach whatever expectations those teams have. So,
and I put it right along those lines. Everybody that, it could be Rutgers' year. This could be when they turn. Come on, stop.
Especially not now that they lost Omari.
Yeah.
That was a big loss for them.
He's done a good job building what he's built, and now it's just, can they take the next step and get enough guys that can actually score? But They seem
Yeah,
like
I mean, they're potentially fighting.
Where they're like super backcourt heavy, and then last year they just have like a billion big guys. And
yeah, I mean, they're potentially fighting to be like a 4th division Big Ten team, which is progress for Rutgers. You know, they're not like the obvious choice for dead last, so that's something. All right, let's hop in here to segment 2. Here we go.
What's going on? It's Christian Wofford. What's the only thing better than an epic buzzer beater? Celebrating it with friends afterwards. Join my guys Jerod, Andy, Ryan, and Coach on the assembly call after every IU game. Go Hoosiers.
Thank you, Christian. Welcome back to the Assembly Call. You can find all of our content at our website, assemblycall.com. And if you ever want to participate in our unedited live broadcasts or watch those replays, then check out our YouTube channel, youtube.com/assemblycall. I'm Jerod Morris here with Andy Bottoms and Chronic Hoosier. And guys, I think looking in the chat right now, our buddy Joel just kind of summed this up. We were talking during the break about the Big Ten and how a team like Illinois is kind of getting some love and where all the different teams are. And Joel says IU is a complete wild card, could be a complete surprise or finish 10th in the Big Ten. And when you start to look around at some of the preseason projections, some of the the early computer rankings that are coming out, you see some pretty low opinions of Indiana. And I think it's pretty obvious why. I think if you want to make the case against Indiana being an NCAA tournament team, it's really pretty simple. Obviously, Indiana's missed it 3 years running. We lose 2 all Big Ten players off a team that went 8-12 in conference play and lost 12 of 13 at one point. That right there makes it very hard for anyone to see how you could actually be better. In Bart Torvik's preseason rankings, we are 57th, which is 1 spot below Rutgers, 12 spots below Georgia. Devontae Green, Deron Davis, Justin Smith, 3 of the most mercurial players in recent IU history. They have to become consistent contributors, and leaders as upperclassmen. Jerome's health is up in the air. Who knows if we're ever going to shoot free throws well again. So, Chronic, don't worry, we're going to focus most of this segment on painting a rosy picture. But I understand why people have a pessimistic view of this Indiana team. Do you kind of look at it the same way? Like, you think that's a kind of a fair way to look at it from the outside looking in?
Absolutely. I mean, I think for a program that so desperately has and very openly has stated its desire to get back to an elite status and devoted the amount of resources the university has into achieving that, the hype that preceded last year's season and the eventual letdown, I think it burned a lot of people. I think it's something that's going to continue to resonate around the program until they perform differently and change those opinions. But I don't think there's any bit of news, whether it be at the national media. I think it's something that they're probably very much battling on the recruiting trail right now. That perception, I think it's something that could delay some of the what would otherwise be commitments until they see a little bit more film and they see that they can actually play more according to how the whole program is being pitched. I think all across the board, until they prove people otherwise, they're going to have to own that egg they laid last season and just go out there and win some ball games in order for that to turn. And I think that's to be expected when you underperform as much as they did. Now, without getting into the reasons, and there's certainly plenty of reasons why that justify it. People aren't looking at that nuanced level when you're kind of taking an elevated view of the state of things. And I think there's just as many reasons why you could see that surprise happen this season, because people aren't necessarily paying attention to the nuanced level of, what is the development of Demezy Anderson? Exactly how does Joey Brunk fit into the equation? What does Indiana look like when you have a healthy Deron Davis the entire season? Will we ever see a healthy Deron Davis the entire season? Exactly what is Rob Finney's ceiling? Exactly what is Devontae Green's ceiling? I mean, there are so many wild cards, a great term for it. There's so many wild cards in play. This thing really could break in any number of directions, and it could go really far off the charts from end to end. I just don't know which way to predict it until we actually see them and what this new construction of Indiana basketball looks like.
Yeah, no, it's crazy uncertain. And that's why all we can do now in the offseason is just kind of look at what could happen and kind of look at, probabilities and likelihoods and try to assess it from that standpoint. Andy, before we start painting the rosier picture, anything else that we haven't mentioned yet as kind of a reason why you're pessimistic about the upcoming season?
I mean, that was pretty bleak already, but I would.
It only goes up from here.
I know. I guess the only things I would add were certainly defensively on the whole. IU continue to show some improvement, but if you look at the conference only, even the defensive numbers, like we kind of beat the offensive stuff into the ground as it should have been. But even conference only defense, IU ranked 9th in defensive efficiency. So even the thing that kind of felt like you could hang your hat on a little bit wasn't. I mean, anytime you lose 12 out of 13 games in that stretch, those numbers aren't going to look great, but that's the reality of the situation that they were in. And the other one is really a question of who do you trust at this point, and what do you trust from an identity standpoint of this team? Who's that going to be? Who on this roster really, Juwan at least was a guy last year. Yeah, we can nitpick the 3-point shooting or some things like that, but you had a pretty good idea what you're going to get from him on a night in and night out basis. And I'm not sure that you have really anybody, at least in a kind of front and center role, that that about. What you can expect from guys who have played roles before to a certain extent, but it's definitely a trust factor. And for a team that lost that many games during that stretch, I think that loss, that trust is kind of fleeting from a fan perspective. And then even at the end, kind of reeled everybody back in, started to feel like things were going in the right direction. And then that trust was given away pretty quickly again with that Ohio State game of the Big Ten tournament. So, that aspect, which is not an on-court thing necessarily, is definitely one that, kind of hangs over everything in my eyes.
Okay, so that was the depressing part of the segment. Now let's focus on trying to paint the picture, kind of stating the case for why Indiana could be an NCAA tournament team. There are a few easy, kind of well-chronicled ones that we've talked about on several past episodes. Let's just get those out of the way right now. Obviously, last year's team certainly looked like a tournament team, probably would have been if it were not for a rash of injuries. And that level of bad injury luck is unlikely to happen again. A decent team losing 12 out of 13 is pretty fluky, because as poorly as Indiana played during that stretch, they also were burned by some crazy makes at the end of games. And that extended combo of poor play and bad bounces, also unlikely to happen again. So just, almost from a law of averages standpoint, those two things should get better, God willing. The 3-point shooting efficiency should improve. I've talked about that on Podcast on the Brink and here. We don't need to get into that a lot. You take away two guys that were shooting 30% or less and distribute those to better shooters. You should shoot better from the 3-point line. And obviously, if Jerome Hunter is healthy, he's an impact player. But it doesn't make a whole lot of sense to speculate about that because we have absolutely no idea if that is going to happen. So, Chronic, I'll start with you. What are some other reasons that you think are reasonable, that you semi-believe in as reasons why this team could beat expectations?
Well, I think for starters, and you mentioned it earlier, but when you have historically low shooting averages and 3-point shooting, free throw shooting, it's really hard to go a whole lot lower than the bottom, although I wouldn't dare this team. But and the bar set pretty low for them as far as making improvements there. I think the biggest thing for me is you now have a core group of players who are going into their third season with the coach. Over half of their eligibility has now been spent under this exact staff. I think you would hope at least the leadership is a little bit more ingrained in the roster, having had so much repetition with what Coach Miller is trying to do, and whether it be practices, as the season progresses and they install the offense, as they learn to make adjustments. I just think the more familiarity, the more experience they have together, hopefully the smoother things are going to run for them. And also helping acclimate the new guys faster, because there's that many more resources available to them. Just kind of pull them in the direction that they're trying to get them going. I think beyond that, I was probably the biggest star last year for me as far as up-and-comer. Rob Fennessy was incredibly impressive when he was healthy. I really want to know what this kid's ceiling is, at least as a sophomore, and just really excited to see what his growth and development's like in year two, now that he's got a better understanding of what Coach Miller's expectations are for that position, the additional time they've had to work. I think that's going to be everything for this team, because ultimately, with the absence of Romeo, the absence of Juwan Morgan, having an effective point guard getting the ball where it needs to be in various situations is going to be paramount, because you no longer have that safety valve in the offense that Juwan Morgan provided. Whenever things kind of fell apart, you could always dump it down low and just watch him make magic. More often than not, that was effective enough. They're not going to have that available now. So I think it's going to be paramount that they run what they're trying to do, and then they get the ball where it needs to go in various situations, because until somebody emerges as just a knockdown shooter or just your A option from scoring standpoint, it's going to have to be a team effort, and that's going to start at the point guard position. So I'm excited to see exactly what season 2 of Finney looks like.
You mentioned Rob Finney. Listen to this stat, and this might make you cry or might make you excited, depending on your perspective. But he had 4 more assists 6 times in the first 12 games. Obviously, when he came out of the gates really well, Indiana was 10-2. He had 4 more assists 7 times in the final 8 games, which was kind of after he had recovered some from the concussion. Indiana went 6-2 in those games. So overall, 16-4 in those games. In the middle 12 games, so from when he came back from the concussion and really just for a while didn't look right, he had 4 more assists 1 time in those games, and Indiana went 1-11. And and obviously he was a 40% three-point shooter before he got hurt. And to me, one of the underrated reasons why Indiana can be better next year is that guards win in college basketball. And we have right now a very unheralded group of guards, but I think it's possible that, our relatively experienced guard rotation for modern-day college basketball could turn out to be underrated, because all those guys, I think, had their moments last year, but also suffered from circumstance or injury. I think Rob with the injuries we talked about. I think Al Durham's injury to his shooting hand was kind of an underrated thing. Before he got injured in the Michigan State game, counting the threes he made in that game, he was shooting 39.3% from 3. After that hand injury, which I was told by a few people was affecting him even though he kept playing, he shot 29.6%. Before the injury in Big Ten games, he was averaging 9.2 points. After that, he was averaging 6.6 and had 4 games of 3 points or less, so he was very inconsistent. With him being healthy and, another year of experience, I think he becomes, more of a consistent shooter, more of a consistent scoring option, health willing. And then, Andy, obviously, Devontae Green, I think is a guy who struggled with his role and struggled with injury early on in the season. He came into the season, I think, expecting to be the starting guard, lost his job to Rob Finney, got injured. But over the last 7 games, when he really got a chance to kind of take the reins and shine, we saw an all Big Ten level player. 15 points per game, 4 assists, 4 rebounds, 2 steals, 50% from 2, 51% from 3. And he enters this season as a senior with his role solidified. So does that help him carry over his strong play into his senior season? I don't know. These are all big question marks, but I do think, the path to Indiana exceeding expectations, I think, goes through the guards really outplaying what people expect. And I think they've shown flashes, and I think there are also some things you can look back to last year and say, hey, injuries, inconsistent role. I can understand why those guys might have been a little bit inconsistent. Their roles are going to be much more clear this year, and I think that's going to set them up for much better seasons. And that'll be huge for Indiana if it happens. But I think that's an underrated reason, I think, why Indiana can be better than the expectations.
I think the Devontae piece is a big one, because he succeeded last season, or he had his best games when his role was clearly defined, and that role wasn't to be the point guard. I think everybody always kind of felt like that was a potentially square peg in a round hole situation, and trying to figure out how to put him into that role. And so now that really isn't on the table for this season, barring some kind of injury or something else. So it's a little bit clearer, and I think he could play a little bit freer, even though many people might say he played free enough as it was, without having to feel like he was the initiator of what was going on. And I think that ties in a little bit to Finney, and that's probably would have been at the top of my list for things that I would point to that would allow them to do it, for a couple of reasons. One, if you look at the league, and you and Alex talked about this with Dylan Burkhart on podcast on the Brink this week. This is a pretty point guard heavy league with Winston and Xavier Simpson, Anthony
Frazier.
Cowan at Maryland. So you've got a lot of those guys in there. So that position is important in any level, but it's particularly important in the Big Ten. And he showed at times that he was really able to step up to those kinds of challenges. And I think the other thing is when you looked at him coming in, everybody's vision of him immediately was, what's this guy going to be like in 4 years? He's a guy who by the time he's a senior is going to be, just a rock steady point guard that you're going to have. And I think he was ahead of schedule by any measure last year to be able to step in and do what he did. And people can say now, oh yeah, I saw this coming, or whatever the case, like he was ahead of schedule. So if he continues to be ahead of schedule, and his sophomore season, so maybe his freshman season looked like what people might have expected as a sophomore. Maybe his sophomore season looks like what you might expect of a junior in that position. And I think if he continues to kind of be ahead of schedule on his development curve, that bodes really well, as you said, from the backcourt perspective.
So, one that I hadn't really thought of, and I've got a couple more I'll get to if we have time, but Chronic, one that I hadn't really thought of that was mentioned in the chat was, basically this, and you talked about this a little bit, I think, with, guys being a little bit more comfortable in the system, but also just maybe a little bit of a different attitude on the court, possibly a little bit more emotion, with guys like Joey Brunk who were there. How big of an impact do you think that can make? Trace Jackson Davis, who obviously is, I don't know exactly what he's like on the court, but he's already showing, to be a guy that's got a personality. When you had guys like Romeo and Jawan that were so even keel, that's a real positive in some senses, but it also can have its drawbacks. Maybe a team that, obviously Rob Finney is not a guy who's particularly emotional, but some of those other guys, if there's a little bit more of that on the court, a little more visible toughness maybe, I wonder if that could have an impact as well. Maybe not, but what do you think?
I think it absolutely can. And I think when you just look at just in the broader sense, the energy that various players bring, think about a guy like Justin Smith. If Justin Smith can harness the athleticism, if Justin Smith can get a little bit stronger in finishing, if Justin can kind of figure out where he fits in the offense, I've been screaming for years. Justin Smith would be unguardable on the baseline, kind of like Troy Williams.
He is every time he focuses on it. It's so frustrating.
No, I mean, it just kind of like it clicked with Troy that if he can slash and he just commits to cutting hard and takes various angles and finds those holes in the defenses, once he gets a little bit of momentum going, you cannot stop that guy without fouling him. And chances are he's going to put you on a poster. That level of explosiveness, that energy that it can bring to an offense is immeasurable. And in this, obviously the same thing goes with the caveat being, can he, get medically cleared with Jerome Hunter? I mean, this is a jump out of the gym level athlete. This is a guy who's just, Jawan, I think it was at his locker room interview as the season ended, was talking about the way in which Jerome went at him on both ends of the floor every single practice when they first got, started doing open gym together, and just what potential that could unlock for an offense, especially with the needs it's going to have this year. I think absolutely that's going to be a huge component of whatever this team can become, is having those guys. And, we talk about leadership and it's the intangible elements of it. Keep in mind, and I studied leadership in high school. At Culver, leadership is something that's demonstrated. Leadership is something you have to go out and do. You can talk all you want, but you have to lead by example. And, even for some of the quieter guys, if they go out there and they do their job consistently and they do it at a high level, so that their teammates can have that trust, that confidence that guy's going to be there when he's supposed to be, whether it be on offense and defense. And I just focus on me, or when I get beat, I know he's going to be there to help. What that level of confidence and that trust does is it really is immeasurable as far as, generating the team chemistry it's going to take for these guys to achieve their potential. And at the end of the day, you've got to have guys that can inject energy when a team needs to counterpunch. And I think there's a ton of guys. I mean, Devontae, his explosiveness and the way that he can just completely turn things in a totally different direction when he gets dialed in. Their ability to harness that energy and focus it, in the right direction, I think could prove immeasurable for this team. I don't know how you guard a team that's got Devontae firing on all cylinders, that's got Justin Smith really dialed in, and nobody's even seen what Jerome's capable of, other than those that have been in Cook Hall for the most part. I think there's a huge number of X factors that could reveal themselves that made this team, to talk about what can make them surprising. All of the above right there. I don't know that anybody's been able to fully comprehend that, because honestly, we've never fully seen that. So it's certainly in the cards. Whether or not it can materialize remains to be seen. But I think there is a lot of reasons to believe you have a lot of those guys on this roster that can really take this team to a level that most of us can't really predict at this point.
Yeah, and maybe there will just be better on-court chemistry. We heard a lot from guys that there was good off-court chemistry last year, but it certainly looked like at times, and it is understandable given the injuries and some of those things, that they look like a team that didn't have a lot of on-court chemistry, and that alone could help. One last point that I wanted to get to, Andy, I want to get your thoughts on this. We haven't talked a lot about the big guys, but you mentioned the defense. We were 9th in conference play last year in 2-point field goal defense, which tends to be the statistic that defenses can control the most, and is really the one that you want to look at for how good is a defense. And I think some of that was, Juwan being overmatched in the post because of his size, or just giving up open layups to prevent fouls. I think that's going to be a lot less of a problem this year with De'Ron, Joey Brunk, Trace Jackson-Davis, and Race Thompson, plus Justin Smith, all down low, both just in terms of the size and the bulk of those guys, the experience, and the ability to not have to play in fear of foul trouble because you've got depth down there. On the other side of the court, you look at the 2-point field goal percentage on offense, and I think this has been everybody's fear, is that, okay, the 3-point shooting may get better, but our 2-point percentage is what carried us on offense last year, because we were terrible from 3-point range, terrible from the free throw line, but we were 63rd in the country on twos at 53.1%, thanks in large part to Romeo and Juwan's efficiency, and it's scary losing that production. But, you look at it, if De'Ron can play more and get a higher volume of shots, he's a 60% shooter over the last 2 seasons. Joey Brunk, 61.2% from 2-point percentage for his career. Wild cards, of course, are Trace Jackson-Davis, who we just don't know because he's a freshman, and Justin Smith, who's 55% for his career, and with a little bit better shot selection, he's a guy who can be 60% from 2-point range. So, Andy, we almost surely will drop some in 2-point percentage because Romeo and Juwan were that good. But if we can tick up into the top 150 in 3-point percentage, even if we drop a little bit in 2-point percentage, it is possible. Like, you can see a scenario where we're actually better, more consistent overall offensively, even without the individual highs of Romeo and Juwan. Does that logic kind of make sense?
I think so.
I hate it when Andy hesitates afterwards.
Squint really hard. I think so. The challenge is a little bit of, to me, it comes down to some of the spacing and some of those kinds of components. I mean, Romeo had the ability, just based on sheer talent, to get around guys, and Juwan had some quickness advantages over the guys that he was playing against in the post. So, citing Davis and Brunk, it just becomes, what is the offense going to look like? And we certainly want to see that evolve from what it was last year. Does that really just turn in? Are you getting more true post-ups with those guys? Are you running fewer ball screen type things with, than you did? Like, what are you trying to do to get those guys in positions to score? And how does that impact the overall flow of your offense? And do you have the shooters to space people out enough to give those guys room to operate? And I think last year you ran into a little bit of, we would have these lineup conversations of, well, could you not play Juwan at the 5, and maybe you play De'Ron beside him, but then what do you do with Justin Smith, because you really didn't want him to play the 3 because he couldn't shoot well enough from the outside to really pull guys away from the basket. So I think you get back into some of those dilemmas if you can't find some combination of those guys who can step out and make some shots a little bit. Now, I do think Trace gives you a little bit of a different look there from at least some of the things that you talk about him being able to do maybe a little bit differently. I think he's going to be another guy who shoots pretty well from 2-point percentage. So I think you can see that part of it as well. It just, to me, it boils down to, you have some pieces that you could utilize who can shoot well from a 2-point perspective. I think the question is, how do you structure your offense in a way to be able to allow them to capitalize on what they can do down there? And how do you get enough other guys on the floor to make shots to give them the room that they need to do what they need to do inside? Or does some of that come in the form of offensive rebounding, and you take a little bit different tact there and really try to attack the offensive glass more than what they did a year ago? And
we could be a good offensive rebounding team.
So do you change philosophically a little bit in that way? Like, maybe you would. So it's a little bit hard, because I think the offense is going to look so different, hopefully in a good way, than what everybody saw last year, which at times just turned into guys standing around trying to hope that Romeo or Juwan would make plays. And so I do think that's another potential option of, not having, the crutch or two of those guys to really rely on. I think it puts more emphasis on, good execution, good ball movement, and those kinds of things, as opposed to feeling like, hey, I've got these 2 guys that I can really lean on. So that's a luxury that feels bad to get rid of at one point, but you could also tell yourself a story that, maybe less reliance on those guys is a good thing. So I think to me, it turns into, what does the offense look like and how is it different than last year to take advantage of what could be those, positives that you mentioned.
Yeah. All righty, coming up in our third and final segment, we're going to answer your questions, starting with Chronic dishing on the most interesting rumor he's heard around Bloomington this summer, and then we'll get to however many other questions we can get to, as we always do. Stick with us here on the Assembly Call. We'll be right back. All right. Well done. That segment went better than I thought it would, actually.
The only thing I did mention that I've been meaning to is, twofold. Al Durham. I don't even think we said his name yet. Or if we have, I missed it because I've been trying to consume some other stuff here in the
site. I mentioned him when we talked about the guards. But there's a lot more depth we could go into on him.
One thing that I think the parallels between what they're going through now and, the early Crean era, the Jordy, the Watford, the Elston class, and how those guys kind of took their lumps and just kind of really forged that character in the fire. Not the least of which was because they just continued to grind and really sharpen up some of the smaller, elements of their game that really made the execution that much better. You look at the roster and who's the hardest grinder on this team, and it's got to be Al Durham, right? Like his work rate is insane.
So let's open up the next segment with this.
And just like, what is Al Durham's offseason like right now? Because I just see the guy.
Well, ask Joel, because he just tails Al Durham. He follows Al Durham everywhere, into Cook Hall, home. I'm waiting for Joel to pop up in the chat here. He's the president of the Al Durham fan club. But yeah, that guy's in the gym all the time. So if he can just be healthy, I guess you can say that for everybody. So yeah, let's Chronic. Let's open with that, because we only got a couple of questions. We didn't get a ton of questions. So
no, and like I said though, I do think there's something to be said for how the individuals, as well as the team, respond to the disappointment, the frustration that they had to confront this entire offseason now. I think it tells a whole lot about how they're going to respond to it. And I'd like to have confidence that it's going to be positive. I don't know. I that's the one thing that gives me hope, is there's enough guys that are willing to put in the work this offseason that turn things around. And the only way to do that's through sweat and through a whole lot of open gym.
Yep. Indeed. All right, so we've got 5 minutes and 57 seconds for this segment. So I'll keep you updated in the chat. And then, Chronic, if you're in the middle of talking and I need to do the outro, I'll just play this sound drop.
We're out of here. I got to go.
That's not it. It's this one.
That's it. We're done. No more questions.
So if you hear that, then we got to do the hard out, but then we can pick it up after the outro stuff.
Perfect. I'll try to keep it brief and concise.
Oh, nice. Joel said he met Brian Evans at Cook Hall last week. Nice to see Brian Evans back in Bloomington.
That's one thing I would like to see, is more former players back around the program on a more frequent basis.
I agree. As often as possible.
Well, because that's the thing. It's kind of like Coach Knight. Everybody comes back to Bloomington. It just doesn't make the news.
Yeah.
And by news, I mean it's not widely reported because they choose for it not to be. They keep everything pretty low-key.
Yeah. All right. By the way, do you have – I guess I teased this, so I have to ask you. But someone asked, what's the best IU-related rumor that you heard this summer? Do you have some material for that? You don't have to name names.
It wasn't a rumor.
I feel like there's something there.
It wasn't a rumor. So when I did Mike's exit interview, his all-time favorite Crean moment wasn't actually the one he shared. And let's just say it involved Juwan Morgan puking and Tim Priller crying.
Whoa.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, it was fabulous. It was absolutely fabulous.
I have to listen to that. I got to get caught up on my listening. I was gone for a week, so I look forward to it. I'm sure that was good. How long did you guys go for?
It was awesome, but for the fact that we were set up in the back room at Nick's in the very back corner. because I wanted to get away from the speakers. And what ended up happening is we were so close to these brick walls that it actually amplified all the other noise. And that's what took me so long to drop it, was trying to get the audio cleaned up. But when the background noise is so much,
it's hard.
It was just, I mean, dude, we broadcast live from a bar.
Yeah. You get what you get.
In a camcorder. It was fabulous. I loved every minute of it. I wish I could have stayed longer. My daughter had a head injury or had a neck injury, and I had to come home that night.
Oh no. Is she okay?
No, she's totally good. She got through the concussion protocol, but it was the day of that interview, so we wanted to make sure everything was okay. So I didn't get to hang out as long as I wanted to, and give it the proper send off.
Yeah. All right. Well, let's hop into this. And okay, here we go.
This is Nick Zeisloft. I never miss an open three, and I never miss an episode of The Assembly Call.
Thank you, Nick. Welcome back to The Assembly Call. I'm Jerod Morris here with Andy Bottoms and Chronic Hoosier. Remember, you need to be subscribed to our email newsletter. We send out a weekly IU news roundup, even during the offseason, and after every game, we send out a detailed post-game analysis. Just text IU to 66866 or go to assemblycall.com. That's IU to 66866 or go to assemblycall.com. All right, guys, time for the mailbag. These questions submitted via Twitter or via our private IU basketball discussion community, which you can learn more about at assemblycall.com/community. Chronic, the first question directed to you. This is from our buddy JD. What is your best IU-related rumor that you heard this summer that you are willing to say on the air?
Honestly, the best rumor I think I heard that I'm willing to say on the air was just all the nonsense, all the speculation and the innuendo that swirled around at the end of the season, and all the post about who was leaving and the sourcing behind it all. It was absurd on so many different levels, and to see, at this point in the year, I would like to believe at least the roster is not going to have any more subtractions from it, but to see everything generally disproven for the most part. That's probably the top rumor, was that, we were losing everybody and their brother. Was just, they hated each other and they were out the door. So glad we dodged that bullet, but that was some kind of mess there for a minute.
And by the way, I meant to lead off the segment with this. When we got off the last segment, you kind of had one thing that you wanted to jump in with, and we had to close the segment. But you wanted to talk a little bit more about Al Durham in terms of, reasons for optimism for this upcoming season. What is it about Al that has you pumped up?
I just absolutely love everything about Al's work ethic. I mean, the kid just grinds and grinds and grinds. He drives so hard in everything he does. And when you look back at the disappointment that the Jordan Halls, Derek Elston, Christian Watford, the early Crean team, that they, the adversity that they were faced with, and the way in which that forced them to really, really dedicate themselves, not just to the game, but to the team, and how that pulled them together. I think that the circumstances set up for a similar response. And when you look across the roster, who would be the one guy that kind of coalesces everyone around that shared goal and gets things head in the right direction? I got to believe it's Al. I just, everything about the kid resonates just tough, and you're going to have to kill him before you can stop him. And I can only imagine what Al's doing this offseason. I can only imagine the way in which Al's trying to pull his teammates to make them better. And I can't wait to see what next season Al looks like, because he's not going to work any less. And I think this team's absolutely going to need him just to run people silly. They're going to need him to get buckets. They're going to need him to defend like his life depends on it. And I think Al's up for the challenge.
All right. So to somewhat circle back to the rumors around Bloomington, give the football fans out there a name or something that you've heard that can inspire some potential optimism as we close in on the season.
Football rumors. Football rumors is we've got.
I'd like them to only be positive.
There's a heck of a quarterback competition going on in Bloomington right now. You've got a lot of guys who have a lot of different talents.
Is it a real competition?
I think,
because I've been listening to Crimson Cast. And
I think we may not have the fullest competition just because of Penix's status with his recovery. But I think you've got a lot of arms back there that bring a lot of different looks to the quarterback position. I think with the changing the offensive staff, I think there's a lot of guys there that have the potential to really blow up this year. Man, you know what? It's IU football. It could be the season that turns the program's fortunes around forever, or it could be 5-7 and we're all drinking in November asking why are we IU football fans. I don't know what else to say. They are who they are until proven otherwise. But I feel good. I feel really, really good.
All right, good. Last question. This is from David. We've got about a minute and a half left. He's basically saying if everything that we talked about in segment 2 doesn't happen, so if this year goes sideways, if
all the first things we talked about in that segment are absolutely true?
Yes. He wants to know, how do we, quote, keep it together as IU fans? Andy, do you want to fathom what a season of post-game shows will be like if this is?
I'm not sure. I'm not sure we'd be able to. Quite frankly, I don't think there's a good answer to this question. No, I mean, yeah, that's really that's bleak. That puts an even bleaker spin on like how you'd try to turn that around. I mean, I think you'd like to try to figure out like what the positives are that look forward to the following season. I guess it depends what the issues really are. If it's a repeat of the issues that we've seen a year ago, I think that becomes a really tall order to try to, quote, keep things together. The simple answer is booze, I guess, would be the way.
That's what Megan said in the chat. So
yeah, exactly. So
that's the constant answer, whether we win or lose. It doesn't matter, good or bad. Booze is always going to be there for us. Honestly, the easiest way to hold things together if this goes south is we go full Jonestown. Everybody has a mass account deleting together, and we nuke the entire IUBB world. Just wipe it off the digital web.
Okay.
That's it. We're done. No more questions.
We will have to end on that question. That is going to do it for us on this week's episode of the Assembly Call. If you want to see us do the show live, join us at assemblycall.com on Thursday nights for the live broadcast of our Assembly Call radio recording. And you can always subscribe to our podcast by searching for Assembly Call wherever you listen to podcasts. And don't forget to go to assemblycall.com or text IU to 66866 to join our free email newsletter. Thank you for listening. We will talk to you again next Thursday night. Until then,
take it from me, Jordan Halls. Keep your elbow in and your eyes on the rim. And go Hoosiers.
Thank everybody for coming out. All right, I got to get out of here, folks. Thank you.
All right, and cut. But we're still live on YouTube, Chronic, so no.
Fair enough.
Don't turn your video back on. Although that would be the greatest edition of AC After Dark ever.
Yeah, things would get nuts. Little y'all know I'm naked.
Little does everybody know that 2 minutes before we went live, your video and name were up there.
It very much was.
Until we switch things, but
I need to get a mask.
We're a professional operation here.
I've got to find some. I don't know. I've got to find a workaround for this issue.
For what? The identity?
My live feed and create an avatar.
Oh, yeah.
I don't know.
I don't know that you can. Well, I mean, you can with Zoom, but it's kind of complicated.
Yeah, I have a hard time.
There's not like an easy way to do it. Yeah.
I have an amazing ability to mess up even the simplest technologies, usually right at the time of recordings.
Yeah. Well, that's what happens when you do live shows.
The best time to have technical issues, really.
Yeah. No, and speaking of which, I actually have a Mike Miller, Dustin Dopiriak cocktail hour sitting on my laptop right now. We went through 3 different video feeds, the camcorder, the camera, and I forget, I brought in another camera. And then as a brand new camcorder, everything was great. And then I put the SD card in my computer, and it's this crazy format. And yeah, I've got a workaround. I've just got to do the stitching now. It's going to be a fabulous shit show, though.
Do we know who's going to fill in for Mike?
I have not yet heard that. There was some talk because when Mike and I sat down, word had just got out. Applications were just starting to come in. I don't think it had really had a chance to amplify at least the opening. I'm not exactly certain with the state of the paper if they're going to bring another person on, if they're going to, perhaps pass it to Jeremy Price or John Blau. I haven't heard anything on that. And at the end of the day, though, too, the saddest part about it is for all the wonderful people I've known at the HT over the years, pretty much everybody's gone. And it's not great right now. So buy a paper, folks.
Yeah. That is absolutely true.
At the end of the day, though, too, I mean, they are the flagship newspaper for Indiana University. It would be a shame if whoever owns it doesn't invest in that page specifically, because for decades, well, at least since the advent of the internet, sports has been absolutely what drives the IU sports, and it would be insane for them not to invest in that desk.
Yeah, I agree. So are you going to the Crimson Cast bar crawl?
This is the first I've heard of bar crawl.
Seriously?
It
is. When is it, Andy? Because you're going, right?
Full disclosure, I've been totally unplugged for a long time now.
Yeah.
I think
No,
it's
we're
August
bringing
3rd.
you up to date.
Believe
August
it.
3rd. Yeah, I think it's August 3rd, too.
Sign me up. I haven't bar crawled in a minute.
Yeah, I think Andy will be there. I think Coach is going. I'm not going to be able to make it, and Ryan's not going to come, but should be a fun time.
That's Saturday. Yeah, I am absolutely in for that.
Cool. Yeah, everybody. Chat Mob is confirming August 3rd. August 3rd.
Boom.
All right.
Put it in my calendar. I'm there.
Cool.
When are you coming up next for the annual AC trip?
Yeah, we're gonna do it. We need to wait and see the schedule. We usually end up doing it sometime during Big Ten play, because that usually ends up working best. It's hard to get everybody there before, just because of holidays and all that stuff.
No, I get it.
Probably for some Big Ten game over the weekend. So hopefully our schedules connect and we can hang out.
Hopefully there actually will be some Big Ten games over the weekend. I know the one year there was like basically
two
that were on a Saturday because the Friday night and
Sunday
and all that fun stuff.
Yeah.
Oh, well. We'll find out.
It's gonna be tough to top last year's game that we were at, beating Michigan State.
That's true. That is true.
That was pretty phenomenal. So
agreed.
We'll be up. I don't know when. Hopefully the schedule comes out soon. I saw Purdue release their schedule. Michigan released theirs. So
yeah, I think that's the one thing when you talk about how things turn for IU. I think it's absolutely essential that they not just win games, but they've got to get some upsets because for the lack of momentum that they've suffered, and I think it was at the absolute worst time as from a program building standpoint, because I think it really stalls you out on the recruiting trail, and that's absolutely the issue you've got to address. Is you've got to get some talent in there. I think the quickest way to regain that, though, is if they can get an early knockoff somewhere, somehow, and just start making noise and get the eyes back on IU without such critical skepticism.
Do we have any games that would be like that? I mean, like we play Florida State. They'll probably be ranked higher than us. But other than that, it's UConn, Arkansas, and
Florida State loses a lot, too, so I'm not even sure that one would.
And Notre Dame. So those are all games that like we kind of are going to go in expecting that we should at least win or be tight on. We don't really have the big non-conference.
Yeah, maybe one of those early Big Ten games is a chance for that.
Yeah.
Depending on who that. I mean, you don't know who that would be yet, but
yeah. I mean, I agree with you though. Like they have to make the tournament next year. I mean, it's one of those things. Like you just got to find a way to do it.
Oh no, I jokingly said Jonestown, but I will go full Jonestown because I don't know that I want to be. It's just I don't even want to imagine what the landscape looks like after another disappointing season. I just think it gets ugly. I think it brings out the worst in the fan base, and we've already had to battle the the perception that IU is toxic because the passion is just so hot, and because the fortunes have been so bad for this long. I don't want to see that come to fruition because I think it would just be absolutely abysmal for everybody involved. And I think it just makes the hill to climb that much steeper, if not insurmountable. They've got to find a way to get it together. They absolutely do.
Agreed.
Yep.
But we just can't find a way to end on a positive note here.
No. It's going so well. What are you going to do?
Well, it's been a rough few seasons.
What has been the highlight of your summer so far?
The highlight of my summer? We just took a trip to Destin, which was a lot of fun. So my daughter got to play in the ocean.
Nice.
And it was it was fun doing that. Just getting away for a week. So that was the highlight.
Did you get to do Lulu's beachside dining right by the bridge?
No, we did not. We pretty much cooked at home most nights. We got like an Airbnb and just grilled out and kind of hung out at the beach and then Went back home and grilled.
It's a great beach for swimming, especially with little kids.
Yeah, it is. It is. It'll be more fun to actually like go out and do stuff when we don't have little ones. So, yeah, and we saw this incredible. I tweeted out a picture of it. This incredible golf cart that was like candy striped and all decked out and IU stuff. And I didn't realize that. Apparently, Jay Horry was telling me that like Destin, Florida, is just like the place that so many people in Southern Indiana go for a vacation.
It's one of the closest direct beaches to make a beeline to.
Yeah, I had no idea. But we saw tons of Indiana people there, so that was cool.
I actually had to do a double check. My buddy, my former business partner, my best friend, I thought that was his golf cart because he had one of those.
Oh, really?
Yeah, it didn't have the back seat. He had a cooler built into it where the clubs normally go, but it was tricked out exactly the same way. And then he just stopped using it. So eventually he sold it. And I had to go back and check my pictures of his cart previously because I thought that was his cart that you had seen.
That's awesome.
It's like
I gotta get one of those. Yeah. Hey, by the way, Juwan Morgan with 7 points and 6 rebounds in Summer League tonight. Good for him.
That's good. Yeah, he's rebounded relatively well, and most of the times I've checked the stats, it seems like.
Yeah, good for him.
Yeah, more than anything for me, it's been him being comfortable enough to pull the trigger in spots where you're so used to seeing him do it. I think he's so so focused on being that board man or, trying to figure out what his niche is that he's forgetting that he's a really prolific scorer and that translates.
Yeah. Hopefully he gets a chance somewhere.
Yeah, hopefully so.
All right, gents. Well, let's Chronic, thanks for coming, man. Always appreciate it. Hopefully we can do this at least one more time this off season.
As always, thank you so much for having me. It's always fun to join.
Get you on for a post-game show or two. When's the next Mind Your Banners coming out? And are you guys on iTunes yet? Like, can I actually subscribe to just your podcast yet?
Is
that going to happen?
I take my hiatus and everything, and content kind of drops. So Zach does a lot of kind of solo stuff and brings other people in. I think, and we haven't conferenced on it for a minute. This is about the time where we start ramping up. We do a little football preview. Last I checked, they got us back up online. Gannett, imagine this. They didn't want to pay for stuff. They decided to pay for stuff, and there was talk that every
how cheap is getting a podcast up? It's free to put your podcast
they're
in
not
directories.
Just buying for us. They're not just buying for the Indy Star. They're negotiating contracts across the entire company.
Yeah.
They're actually, I think, one of the largest buyers of podcast time on whatever we use. What is it? SoundCloud.
I do think it's up on the Apple podcast, but I think it's just under like an Indie Star thing. It's not its own.
Yeah, you can't get just that podcast. I don't want all the produced shows and all that stuff.
Just delete them immediately before they even download to your phone.
I will ask that, inquire about that next time we kind of conference on it.
I've asked Zach like 6 times, so he's probably annoyed with me.
I know, and Zach's
bring it up.
I'm a freelancer. I just do it. I don't get any communications really otherwise. And I know Zach is not a whole lot higher than I am up in the hierarchy of who can get shit done there.
It's baffling how bad they're just ruining podcast strategy.
It's not as far as I understand, it's not a sports desk issue. It's not even an Indy Star issue. This is all the corporate stuff that happens when you become a media conglomerate that doesn't want to pay for content. Yeah, I'm not going to trash it and get this thing canceled, but it is.
I know. I should probably be a little nicer. But
I would love
as a listener, I just want to be able to subscribe like I subscribe to all the other shows. Come on.
It's kind of like my own stuff. When my content is as bad as it is from a quality standpoint, the fact that people still find a way to listen to it and can get to the end, God bless everybody, and thank you for continuing to find it, because that's what keeps them buying the space that they don't want to buy. So appreciate it, and we will continue to try to make it better. I promise.
It's good stuff. I enjoy your show.
Thank you. I love
enjoy
yours. And have since I called in from the parking lot of Assembly Hall after a pretty big basketball game there one day.
Yeah, that's right. That is right. Man, be our 9th season.
And what's wild is just where everyone has gone and how the whole community has grown.
Mm-hmm.
And just every bit about that, as frustrated as I get sometimes, and as much as I want to turn off my notifications, it's the very reason that I always turn them back on, because I miss that engagement. I miss that interaction. I miss being reminded how awesome IU fans can be and what great people there are in this group. And that's why I keep coming back. And thank you to everybody that makes that continue to happen for me personally.
I agree. I saw when Megan hopped in the chat, she said her comment, it was needed some real life in this chaos. You guys are absolutely it. I copied that, sent it to myself. Those are always the messages that, when you start wondering, like, hey, what are we going to talk about? Is another off-season episode. It's like, oh, yeah, we're here to talk about basketball, but we're really here to hang out with each other. So let's remember the most important purpose here.
And there's your high note to end on. So
there you go. Exactly.
Now we all have the warm and fuzzy.
Before we delve back into any other kind of negativity, right?
That's right. Where do I have? Oh yeah, here it is.
It's time to shut it down, folks.
There you go. All right, cool.
All right, I'm gonna get to drinking. I'm on vacation.
Sounds good. Do it. Have one for me.
Enjoy.
I'll have more for you. I promise. Have a good night, guys. Thanks again.
All right. See you guys.
Thanks, guys.
Bye, everybody.